A mere 5 centuries after their debut into the cosmos, humanity extended their footprint beyond the confines of the Sol system, reaching the far-flung worlds of the Centauri and Sirius systems. Their interstellar empire grew, with Terra and Mars forming the core, surrounded by 4 planetary and 3 lunar colonies. Their first encounter with an extraterrestrial species, the Seer, a member of the Galactic Council, happened in the strife-ridden year of 92 BI, before impact. And where did the Seer find humanity? In a state of perpetual conflict, of course. The Centauri system was in full rebellion against Sol, utilizing sizable FTL ships to wage war, while Mars was at the tail end of a civil war, a purge against the first generation of genetically modified settlers who objected to the terraforming of Mars. Despite the ongoing wars, humanity's enthusiasm for trade agreements and technology transfers remained undimmed. The Seer, however, after assessing humanity, saw a race stretched thin by warfare, divided by artificial genetic alterations and ripe for exploitation. Their judgment? Humanity's newly terraformed worlds were ripe for the picking. The Seer launched their invasion of the Sirius worlds in 90 BI, leveraging their surprise attack and superior numbers to easily capture both worlds. It was here, during their first orbit on Sirius AA and AB, that they began to understand the quintessential characteristics of human society. The first was unity. The moment the Seer attacked, humanity's internal squabbles ceased. Mars even paused their genocide. Sol and Centauri joined forces to launch counterattacks on the Sirius system and its supply lines. The response was swift and united. The second was the chaotic resilience of their society. What the Seer mistook for a war economy in tatters was, in fact, the default state of human society. If resources exist, they are used to depletion as fast as possible. If any form of central management emerges, it gets circumvented by independent groups immediately. It's a society of individualistic chaos that is surprisingly efficient and resistant to disruption. The third, and perhaps most significant, was the uniquely human emotion of hate. A self-enforced, irrational, and intense dislike for the other. This emotion is a pervasive and potent fuel for human actions. This hate can amplify when a group of humans target their collective disdain towards a common foe. At its peak, hate can override fear, morality, logic, and even truth. A prime example. Within the first year, the human population of the Sirius system was decimated in 3 slave rebellions, with nearly 16 million colonists and 500,000 Seer colonial soldiers perishing. It's a grim testament to the power of human hate that they would rather die than live under Seer rule. Its ability to innovate, especially in weaponizing technology, can also be linked to their capacity for hate. Allowing humans access to new technology is risky, as they are likely to transform it into a weapon. And they're good at it, often enhancing the technology beyond its original concept. When the humans and Seer clashed in space, the humans' battlecruiser groups proved a match for the Seer's carrier fleets. Despite lacking force shields and ion beam weapons, the humans compensated with ablative armor and expertise in dogfighting and anti-aircraft tactics, honed through centuries of atmospheric warfare. Within 5 years, Sirius was reclaimed, and humanity followed the fleeing Seer to their home system. The Seer abandoned their system, believing they had paid their dues. They were mistaken. For the humans, it wasn't about settling scores. It was about avenging their fallen comrades. They pursued the Seer, showing no mercy. This relentless pursuit led the Galactic Council to impose a trade embargo on humanity, to little effect. In a desperate move, the Seer unleashed the Red Storm pathogen on Centauri BB, a bioweapon specifically engineered for Homo sapiens.
Hey, you just turned this into a bucket!
The infection wiped out more than 90% of the population before the dying even started. In total, 3 billion lives were lost in a week. Terra quarantined the entire system, and then all FTL travel was banned. The silence from the sector lasted for a year. Then, reports began to filter in. Human cruiser fleets begging for resources at distant planets, human diplomats being turned away from the Galactic Council, human pirates smuggling between systems, offering exorbitant sums for vaccines, but fleeing at the sight of other human vessels. Estimates put the death toll around 100 billion, with Terra, Luna, and Mars bearing the brunt of the casualties. Not a single planet, moon, or station managed to avoid infection. The human problem, as the Council termed it, seemed to have come to a sudden, tragic end. Despite the harsh criticism from the Council, there was a sense that perhaps the humans had been subdued, even scared into submission. But as history would show, underestimating humans was always a costly mistake. The galactic community got the third lesson on the concept of hate when the Seer tried to settle a system that had recently been conveniently depopulated. The lack of records from Hale 8 maybe should have alerted the bureaucracy that Hale 8G might not have been completely empty when Seer resettlement started. Yet, unfortunately, this fact only became public knowledge when humanity managed to draw every eye to the small world as it was driven from its deep-crust fortress colonies by extensive Seer gassing. On their way out of the system, the small surviving population sent their own message from their little colonial freighters. They dropped what looked to be a relative small amount of primitive fission-only atomics. Far too little in number and yield to qualify as a proper orbital glassing, and they even managed to miss the Sur Capital Collective. But hours after they had jumped away, the Seer managed to find humanity's message in the fallout. Cobalt 60, Tantalum 182, Gold 198. Or decrypted, "If we can't have this biosphere, nobody will." And as the fallout from those salted bombs kept raining down onto Hale 8G, biodiversity was reduced by 99.99% within the first standard orbit. Still shocked by the concept of spite, the Sur were shaken to the core when they detected a cloaked gravitational well projector on the surface of the small, uninhabited moon orbiting their home world Sirius. By the time they managed to find and destroy it, it was already too late. Too late for Sirius and all 8 other worlds with uninhabited moons. In hindsight, Great Seer had managed to get into what humanity refers to as a spiral of violence, something even they tend to try to avoid. Not many minds could claim to have seen a moon deorbit above a densely populated world before. Today almost everybody has, thanks to human engineers weaponizing their first truly unique discovery, and the galactic media that broadcasted all 9 events in a live conference across the galaxy. So I will make this short. Before evacuation even left the planning stage, a tidal wave hundreds of meters in height had destroyed every mega-collective less than 500 kilometers inland. Estimating the death toll of this cataclysm alone is impossible and futile, especially because a mere 3 to 5 days later, these very tidal forces in turn tore their respective moons apart, raining a billion tons of rock onto Sirius and her sister worlds. In the end, less than 1 million made it off-world. But the thoughts of the onlookers were not with the countless billions of dead Seer, nor with their remaining colonies slowly succumbing to disease, famine, and casual orbit bombardment. What almost everybody paid close attention to was humanity doing the unthinkable, the permanent and irreversible destruction of 9 planetary bodies capable of supporting life. They marveled at the lack of logic, the missing purpose, the denial of value, the total disregard of ethics. And they were afraid of dealing with something so boundless in its fury. When the Galactic Council voted to send a large expeditionary force into the Sol system, they found Luna to be an abandoned ghost moon run by a crude AI, and Mars and Terra transformed into bunker worlds with societies of unknown size, barely in the information age, hiding deep below the crust, refusing all contact. Punishment was deemed prohibitively expensive and potentially immoral, considering that Terra seemed unaware of even the exact number of her colonies. arriving at the same time in orbit above the great city world Mundus Universalis, seat of the Galactic Council, home base of the federal fleets, and location of the controller bureaucracy, were 11 outdated human super dreadnoughts with barely an escort. There was minimum communication, no warnings, no suspicious behavior except that the 56 ships proudly claimed to come from a total of 42 different systems spread halfway across the galaxy. And as thousands of the finest military vessels in the galaxy, sponsored by hundreds of different races, watched in disbelief, the 11 super dreadnoughts started dropping 10,000 metric tons of antimatter warheads onto Mundus Universalis, more net tonnage than all other races combined had ever created. The heat released during the first seconds of the onslaught ignited the atmosphere, oxidizing even nitrogen in an unstoppable chain reaction. And as the 11 super dreadnoughts burned brightly in orbit, completely obscured in a slowly expanding cloud of 1,000,000 tons of ablative amor, willfully ignoring all damage and continuously dropping warheads, Mundus Universalis's oceans boiled off while the planet's crust was cracked open, revealing the molten core. Shock and awe is not an exclusively human tactic, but it certainly got a new meaning that day. Because this time, the galactic community even overlooked the total loss of a 10th world capable of supporting life. In the words of Rear Admiral Heliriel, with his fleet at Sol, just about everybody who mattered died today. We, the Galactic Council, have long been masters of the grand game of diplomacy, of the subtle art of trade and agreement. We have understood that the foundation of any civilization is unity, and that the most effective way to maintain this unity is through a balance of power. Yet, in our struggle against the human menace, we stumbled. Their decentralized nature, their chaotic individualistic society, and their seemingly irrational capacity for hatred confounded us. We were unprepared for the guerrilla warfare that they waged, for the terror they spread, and the stubborn resistance they presented. The humans, with their history steeped in conflict and strife, have transformed warfare into an art of its own. They have perfected the tactics of guerrilla warfare, and they have honed their ability to use fear and hate as potent weapons. They have become the masters of what they call terrorism. They have created a situation where, to fight them, we must adopt their tactics, their mindset. We must learn to hate, to use fear as a weapon, to strike from the shadows. But in doing so, we risk becoming the very thing we fight against. We risk losing our unity, our balance of power, our very identity as a civilization. Our history books are filled with tales of civilizations that fell into this trap. They were sucked into the spiral of violence, and they emerged scarred, broken, and fundamentally changed. We cannot afford to make the same mistake. We cannot let ourselves be pulled into this spiral. So what is the solution? How do we fight an enemy that refuses to be defeated, that thrives on conflict, that can turn any situation to their advantage? The answer, surprisingly, comes from the humans themselves. In their own history, they have discovered a powerful tool against hate and fear: forgetting. Human memory is short, and their attention span is even shorter. They are quick to move on, to find new targets for their hate, new challenges to tackle. If we can use this to our advantage, if we can step out of their way, they will forget their hatred for us. They will move on to the next target, the next challenge. They will turn their destructive energy elsewhere. And in doing so, they will give us the time we need to recover, to rebuild, to strengthen our defenses. We must remember that we are not alone in this struggle. We have allies in the Galactic Council, allies who understand the human threat, who are willing to stand with us. Together, we can weather this storm. Together, we can ensure the survival of our civilization. But we must act carefully. We must not let ourselves be drawn into a war of attrition, into a conflict we cannot win. We must not let ourselves be consumed by hate. We must remember our unity, our shared purpose. And most importantly, we must remember that, in the grand scheme of things, we are but one civilization in a galaxy filled with countless others. The humans may have their hate, their fear, their chaos. But we have our unity, our purpose, our shared vision for a better future. And in the end, that is what will carry us through. That is what will ensure our survival. That is what will ensure our victory. So let us stand together. Let us face the human threat with courage and determination. Let us remember our unity, our shared purpose. And let us remember that, in the grand scheme of things, we are but one civilization in a galaxy filled with countless others.